Thank you so much for joining today's session. So we've now come to our third learning outcome for our introduction to programming unit. So what have we done in our previous tutorial? We introduced programming languages. We explained how they works with the syntax and the use of data type and if statements. Also, we looked into how to set up our environment with our IDE, and we looked into more. We looked into data, type of data structure. We introduced array, multidimensional arrays, and the use of loops. So in today's session, we're going to understand programming language again. So we're going to look into understand the range of programming languages, characteristics of programming languages, common similarities, and by the end of this session, learners should be able to identify the most suitable programming language to use based on the resource available, the system being used, compatibility, and the extent of the problem they're trying to solve. So again, yesterday we looked into understanding what low-level and high-level programming languages works. So we looked into Python and JavaScript, which are programming languages that use an interpreter. So the machine try to figure it out what we are trying to assign to them. So it's very much faster when it comes to giving an output. While low-level languages such as C#, Java, and so on, we know that they work with a compiler. So the machine is now to convert our English language program into binary numbers, and is going to again give us an output. It's going to return a value for us. So let's look at this video, which is very much interesting, and you explain to us the difference between high and low level programming languages. So for this video, I will pause the recording. Okay, I hope the video was very useful and explain the difference between high level and lower level languages. So now we're going to explore more the characteristics of different programming languages. So what do we mean by characteristic? We've explained that each program language have abstraction, which must have characteristic for programming language, in which the ability to define complex structure, then its degrees of usability come. So we know that programming languages work with objects and functions. So this also has to be portable. So programming language like Java, for instance, can now be used into different type of environment. So they now have to be have efficiency where this can be easily converted into a machine code and executed, consumes and it also consumes a little space of memory. Also, they have to be well structured and documented. So this, by having a nice structure and well documented, this allows developers which are working in a team to have the ability to work simultaneously on the same project. Also, we all need to have the necessary tools for the development. So we need to have the ability to install the latest libraries and any sort of update that our program might require. And again, we need to have in the appropriate IDE, the appropriate integrated development environment. So now we're going to explain the common similarities between programming languages. So again, the video explained to us how there is a difference between our high-level programming languages that work either with compiler or with interpreter. So we've looked into interpreter ones, which are Python and JavaScript, but at the same time, we still have similarities between our compiler programming languages and our interpreter ones. So for instance, when we look into JavaScript and C#, which these are two similar programs, they can be used to make the same things, and code looks very similar. So the difference is that C# is a so low-level programming language, which means that it's a little bit less optimized for people to use. And we know that the computer uses binary numbers. So we can now use these to think as the lowest possible programming language. Python, JavaScript, and Java, they're also similar because the code doesn't look the same, but they're used for the same purpose. So for instance, when it comes to web application or game, they now going to be coded either with one of these three programming languages. While some programming languages like PHP, they're now completely isolated, so they don't have many similarities with our other programming languages, and the structure of the code is completely different from the rest of the ones that we've looked into. Now we're going to identify the most suitable programming languages and the use. So the type of applications that we already know that we have web application, mobile application, systems application, and so on. So now we're going to identify some of these criteria, and we look into them. When it comes to web application, the most friendly and used programming language is JavaScript. So everything when it comes to web browser is based on JavaScript, and we can even inspect this or even write code on our browser. So we know that JavaScript is the king of web development and is probably the most popular language among web developers. So it's also only language that allows us to create web application for front end and back end. And this happens with the use of Node.js, which is a framework of JavaScript, and also React application that allows us to create full stack applications. When it comes to software development, we're now looking into C++, which is the most popular choice. AI, machine learning, data, and deep learning, we're now looking into Python. So Python is the most used programming language for web application and artificial intelligence. When it comes to working with databases, we're now looking into SQL or SQL, which is a standard programming language that is popular for database management systems. Okay, now we're going to look into our merit task, where we're going to explain the advantages and disadvantages of programming language. So the biggest advantage of having them is that it now allows us to simply create and edit in the various text editor. So we mentioned a couple of IDE, but we can also create program through text editors as well. Disadvantages of our high-level language. So we can now see that this can take additional translation time to translate our code to the machine code. So high-level programs are now they're now going to be slower than our low-level program. So compared to the low-level program, our high-level program is now going to have generally less memory efficiencies. Our distinction task, now I'm going to assess programming code and the problem the code is going to solve. So here we have some steps that we need to take into consideration. So how to start solving a coding problem? First thing first, we need to understand what problem we've been given. Could be a simple equation, or could be anything, creating an object, for example. So we have to now have the ability to understand what are the requirements, what do we need, what sort of commands, function we need to declare for us to solve our program. Then we have to create a step-by-step plan for to solve it. So this, depending on the complexity of the problem, this could be a very straightforward program which requires 5 minutes or 10 minutes of our day to solve, or it could be a massive program which could take us weeks or maybe even months to nail down the issue. We also have to carry out a plan and write our actual code. So we need to develop our computer program, look back at the possible refractors that our solution could be better. And here is a nice explanation of how problems should be tackled in order for us to solve them. So in next tutorial, we're now going to explain the characteristic of object-oriented programming, describe the advantages of using object-oriented programming, explain encapsulation, inheritance, and polymorphism. Okay, so now you've come to looking into object-oriented programming. So from the name, you already understand that our main goal is to create object that allows us to store, retrieve, or manipulate our data. Also, we're going to explain the characteristic of them, such as encapsulation, inheritance, abstraction, and polymorphism. So by definition, object-oriented programming is a style of programming characterized by the identification of classes of object closely linked with the methods, which are our functions, with which they are associated. It also includes ideas of inheritance of attribute and methods. So we have a nice video that's going to explain us object-oriented programming.
Final boarding call for holidays this summer.
Okay, so I hope the video was clear to everyone, where he explained the concept of having object-oriented programming and the main purpose of the four of them. So we know encapsulation is when an object only exposes the selected information. Abstraction hides complex detail to reduce its complexity. Inheritance, where we're going to where our child functions are going to inherit our parents' attribute. And polymorphism, where entities can have more than one form. So again, now we're going to explain these characteristics, where as many of these characteristics, we know that we're now working with classes, and our classes are now going to have our object. So again, from the video, we had an example of we have to look into a car or our DVD player, where we can now have we can now do many things. So our class refers to our car, and we have methods such as start the car, move, speed, and stop. And our attributes are going to be elements such as tires, steering wheel, fuel, and so on. So a class describes the content of our object that belong to it. So it's going to describe an aggregation of data field, which can be called instance variables, and define them operational, where are going to be the methods. So our object is an element or instance of our class. So object is going to be the behavior of our class. So abstraction, again, we're going to hide functions that are not necessary. So if we have to start our car, we can now have just start, which will be the only visible function, and every other stuff will be hidden, such as ignition or whatever we need to start our car. So what are the advantages of object-oriented programming? We've looked into them before. So we have modularity for easier troubleshooting, reuse of code inheritance, flexibility through polymorphism, and efficient problem solving. So when it comes to modularity, means that each bit of our functionality does its own thing while leaving the other bit alone. Reuse of code through inheritance. Again, we mentioned how we could have our parent function, and our child can now inherit the methods, and from this, so we don't need to we don't need to declare them over and over. So it's flexible through polymorphism. So for instance, we have a function, we can now copy this function, and we can now edit the state of it, and you still give us the same output. And it's important for effective problem solving, where it is ultimately about taking a huge problem and breaking it down to solvable chunks. So again, we're now looking into them again. We're now looking into encapsulation. As we mentioned before, by encapsulation, we're now going to refer to the bundling of data along with the method that operates on the data into a single unit. So as we can see, many programming languages use encapsulation frequently in the form of classes. So by using classes, we're now encapsulating our function and attributes. Inheritance, again, we're basically explaining how our child function can now inherit attribute from our parent function. Polymorphism, again, these features simply going to allow a specific route to use a variable of different types and at different times. So it's basically the ability of our programming language to present the same interface for several different underlying data types. So this was everything for today's session. What we'll cover in the next tutorial, we're going to identify a problem to solve using a computer program, write our basic code sequence to solve our program, explain the code using comments, create a test plan, and carry out testing on the computer program using a test plan. And lastly, we're going to review and evaluate the program. So this was everything for today. Is there any question for me?
Yeah, I have one question.
Okay. Thank you,
Is there
guys. Sorry?
Is there any other app can use to create website apart from LinkedIn?
Sorry, your voice is not really clear. Can you?
Is there any other app you can use to create a website apart from LinkedIn?
Do you mind typing in the chat because your voice is not very clear? Sorry about that. Do you mean programming language?
Yes.
Application are created with the use of programming language?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is not like a specific application that allows us to create a website. I mean, I think there are maybe you're referring to WordPress or Wix.
Okay.
Wix.com. Yeah, I think you're referring to WordPress or Wix.com, these are known, they don't require coding. They just, I think they call custom, I'm not quite sure, I can't remember the right name, but with application like Wix and WordPress, yes, you can create a website. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Is there any other question from you guys?
Oh,
Okay, so if there's no any other question, I'm just going to end this session. Thank you very much, guys, for joining, and have a good day. Bye.